Twitter. What does it mean? And it's kind of weird because what it's supposed to mean is sort of this person is verified as being the person they are, which but it also sort of means this person is important enough to be verified as who they are, and that's a kind of really arbitrary kind of judgment.
But they do actually list that on the website. They do have a list, and so I went through that process, and I went yes, okay, submit, and it was denied. So I'm not important enough.
Right.
Are you?
I've never applied.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I have no idea. I mean, I've sort of been on, TV once or twice or something.
Yeah,
I don't think I'm certainly not a sort of any kind of, well-known celebrity or commentator or something. And it's a very arbitrary, the idea that you're, some people are intrinsically important enough that you need to be verified. I mean, pretty much anyone who's been in a major movie and so on. And culturally, it's a very odd kind of, how do we decide how important you're enough? How many albums do you have to sell, or does it matter if you get good reviews? It's a very arbitrary kind of distinction, but it's just one of the different ways where social media platforms try and because the rules of how we sort of socially interact have become. Everyone is like making a whole different set of kind of formal rules for how we organise things, and usually in a context that wouldn't necessarily be formal. I mean, we all understand there are formal rules for how you socially interact in, some context, right? You've been in. Of course, if you go to a black tie event, you're going to be judged on how you dress and stuff like that. But
there's
most
norms.
Of the time, there are norms, but it's almost like every platform invents its own social norms. And
then they design policy around that and react to that.
Yeah, and they try and say every platform tries to redesign how our social life works, which is really kind of odd when you think about it.
But they have a lot of power in that sense as well, because they get to determine who is and isn't important. Because I think before we started recording, we were talking about this false equivalency in the user's mind, or someone when you're receiving in a social feed, alongside somebody who's done their 8 years and their PhD and they've got 2 doctorates, and then Kanye West and Stephen Fry and Bobby Joe from the Midwest. And in terms of the font, they're all there equally.
Yeah, and they're all thrown into this sort of without any obvious context.
And that's how we started talking about the blue tick.
Yeah.
And then we started asking the question about whether the blue tick actually has that as well, and whether it should be multiple colours, because it's it's getting very complicated in the context of confusion for everybody about what they can and can't trust.
Yeah, and it can get really very odd. You can get sort of things where people are, given their blue tick to be verified as, but for work they've done
by who?
But given their blue tick for work they've done under another name or something, for example, or something like that.
Yeah. Or, ironically, have appeared in traditional media.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. For having appeared in traditional media, and that literally the only reason why they've sort of got a tick, does that something means we should take them, what they say, more seriously? Well, in that case,
if you write for the Daily Telegraph, does that legitimise your journalism over somebody who writes for Crikey? For example, that's they probably both got ticks, but I'm just saying it's probably not a meaningful way to determine.
No, and how do you determine who's there's people who've gone through changes in their lives, so they've got their blue tick because of something they used to do and don't really do anymore.
A former child star.
There's things like Belle de Jour. She did her, blog, and now she's essentially a totally different career, but still regarded as a sort of a public persona in an odd sort of way. Have a public past, but not. But why do they have a public? Yeah, they have a public past, but not a public current sort of thing in the same way. There's a lot of very interesting. How we negotiate for that really complex sort of ideas, and Twitter tried to simplify it to you kind of you matter or you don't, which is a really odd way of doing it. And Twitter, I think we talked about it earlier. There's a lot of confusion and non-transparency about the way they try to do things, because they're sort of trying to very sort of slowly they seem to be trying to solve the problems in a sort of reactive, don't be too public about where you really stand on things. I mean, certainly they do seem to have a sort of a strong free speech commitment, but they also seem to be sort of behind a lot of, a little
very inconsistent in the way that they do it.
And they do the things like the shadow banning, which is very lacking in transparency and seems to be a way to sort of solve some problems without having to, solve some problems they're seeing without having to sort of publicly commit to an actual strategy or thing.
Well, I suppose when you're in their position, though, they've also got a lot of... they're always trying to fight the bots. And so I suppose if you are open about your strategy, they kind of can't win, really, because if you're open about your strategy, then they kind of stay on top of that as well. And it just creates a bit of a
And that's one of the
mess.
things. As soon as you sort of commit to particularly technologically mediated sort of rigid rules, but even if there's a human in the process somewhere, but not at a, you're still trying to do it with a minimum amount of human attention that you can possibly get away with.
And also likely an American human or somebody who is imposing certain cultural values as well. So that becomes a whole other
maybe.
problem.
I mean, Facebook, for example, they often it will be people in Facebook making the policy, but knowingly that's their the farms of people who are making the individual decisions will not generally be American. So sometimes I think that's one of the things that a policy is made in a very American context and then interpreted by thousands of Filipino workers in in basically a moderation farm.
Yeah, and not to mention the responsibility and the questionable ethics of exposing somebody to this content. I mean, there's been a lot of media, I think it was about 6 months ago, about people who are receiving the vilest of violent content that they need counselling that they have on site, and they're being paid very little money.
I mean, you can see that's the economic incentive of it, is that they're trying to do this. They're trying to deal with a really difficult and unpleasant problem in the absolute cheapest way they can, and I think Facebook tends to, I think pretty obviously they are sort of trying to let algorithms handle as many of the difficult situations. Like when something gets reported, it almost never for hate speech, whatever, almost never gets banned, and then often they'll go, but an algorithm clearly decides, 20 people have complained about this, we'll take a closer look.
And that's a good thing, because I think when you want to shield people from the worst of the content, because you really don't want to be. I wouldn't want that job either, of sitting down and watching snuff 24/7 and hate speech and receiving that. That's got to have a major psychological impact on a person as well. And so on some level, it's a good thing that the algorithms filter it, but at some point you need somebody to make a legal judgment.
Except that the algorithm is the algorithm's saying, we don't even really look at it until we've had 20 complaints. That means that that's the users who've often seen the content. And I think they do.
It's a trouble.
They do quite a good job of blocking really, genuine or like awful images and things. But I think where it's like, this is ambiguous. Some people think this is hate speech. I think they just don't bother.
That one's in the too hard basket, I think, at this point.
Until it gets there.
But did you see what happened last week, actually? You just remember the Indonesian... I'll have to remember, but everyone's groups, they were setting them to private all of a sudden, because a group, they were it was an organised group in Indonesia who were, I think they had good intentions, actually. It wasn't actually a bad actor. It was actually someone who was going around and trying to report popular groups and get them, hate speech or
Yeah.
I can't remember. Do you remember that? I can edit this
Well,
out.
Indonesia's got they just had a very contentious election, so that would be so the context there is very, very sort of tense. And Indonesia also, blocking things on the internet is the culture there.
So what happened? But you know the story I'm talking about, where all the Australian groups, like even popular innocuous ones, like the vegan group, the CompuGlobal Hypermeganet, the Simpsons fan groups, all with people with like 20,000 plus subscribers in Australia, they all, I don't know if you're a member of many groups, but they all just went suddenly to private, and everyone got notified. And it was 2 days before the election, and my instinct was, someone's gone and weaponized these groups, right? Because we'll get into that later, but that actually happened. But someone actually, because they identified the problem with hate speech groups on Facebook, and it was actually it turned out to be, it wasn't an attack, it was actually a well-meaning activist group who wanted to shut down number of hate groups. So they were they had some sort of bot that was reporting popular Australian groups. And so in some ways it was a very interesting thing, because it was something that's traditionally used for bad things, but it had a good idea and a good intention, because Facebook weren't dealing with these groups, so they took it upon themselves. It's so meta. It's and so crazy.
And this is one of the things when you try and govern social problems with either algorithmic solutions or the cheapest possible sort of implementation.
That's one problem.
But I mean, it's sort of it's intrinsic to the. It's sort of intrinsic in that, the moderation issue for Facebook, it's one of their few costs that grows sort of directly with the more users they have. So it's one of the few costs that really hurts them if it grows. So they obviously going to try and minimise it, but then whenever you try and we'll deal with a complicated sort of social regulation issue by doing it as cheaply as possible, and automating it
at scale.
You end up with complicated dynamics that are very hard to predict and get really out of control. Now, but then the other thing where you really get experts to actually weigh in on it. Well, we know how that works. That's the legal system, right? It easily becomes crazily expensive, very easily. So,
Facebook should hire 25,000 lawyers.
Well,
or at least have basic legal training, I think.
Well, probably not that, but they probably need to work out a system that scales a lot. Scales in a very different way. Maybe has a sort of an inbuilt or escalation.
AI lawyer.
Well, an inbuilt escalation system or something where at some point you just give up on solving it cheaply and go, okay, we've got 1,000 people, reporting this, and other people are very angry and angry about it, and so maybe we should have some sort of, procedure that is transparent and people actually understand where you talk about it and what the sides were. But
so we could learn a lot from the legal system, really, couldn't we? The way that the process of appeal.
Well, maybe, and maybe we just need to accept that it's going to be that these decisions are going to be complicated, and we won't be able to solve them cheaply. But it's also this thing at the root of the problem is that we are reinventing or inventing whole new sort of social dynamics. And every platform is sort of doing it themselves. But they already exist. Well, yes,
we can learn from the offline, from history and lessons from government and
we can, but system. We seem to be doing a very bad job of it. Certainly, there was a whole period early on where social media was huge, and a lot of people were approaching it in ways that were just really, to any sort of
naive,
psychologists, whatever, would seem really crazy. The Facebook really early on, they would,
I was an idiot on Facebook, just on a personal level. I think we all shared more than we realised we were sharing.
I think everyone did. And Facebook as a platform was sort of going, well, why are we private? Shouldn't we be more honest and open? You're like, well, no, that's not actually how people work. We have different context. I think you mentioned LinkedIn, and one of the reasons LinkedIn is sort of a big survivor is because the context is really clear. This is where you present your professional face, And it's...
I think it's actually interesting that you say that, because I disagree. I actually think that LinkedIn is under the radar and actually doing some pretty seedy, dodgy psychological stuff. In a different way. We can move. I think
they are, but at least we sort of know that its context is it's your professional way. I remember Orkut, which was the Google's first attempt at a social media platform, and it came and said, "Oh well, people will want." They seemed like they hadn't put a lot of thought into it. It was more or less Google was surprised that it even took off. It'd just been sort of invented by a few engineers in their 20% time, and that had that idea about, you have a personal and a business context, but they just sort of made it 2 tabs, right? And you'd go onto there and people would not understand that, of course, your personal business are going to get smushed together in a way that can't really be separated once you attach them to one identity that way. And so you'd sort of go there and you'd click on add all your business contacts and things, and then you'd sort of click over to the personal tab and go, and then that didn't have very good privacy controls. So you'd click over to your personal tab and go, well, I see their interests include,
BDSM.
BDSM, for example. And I literally know...
I didn't want to know that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I literally know people that happened to. You sort of click up, And that was... now that, in retrospect, that was sort of, wow, that was crazy, and it's surprised that Orkut even lasted as long as it did. But Facebook tried to push a very similar thing early on.
Yeah, and actually, because I think a lot of people who would be listening to this they're not old people on the internet like us. They weren't around. They kind of rode a wave a bit after Facebook. They joined, but you've got to understand that the real name, when the original internet, they were very heavily based around usernames. You had a lot more freedom. You had a lot more anonymity. You had that safety to be able to be whoever you wanted to be. And I know that for me, I participated with abandon. I remember, this is just an anecdote, but I found out that I was pregnant with my daughter, and I was working I didn't realise that, because we grew up, we started the internet at a time when most people weren't on the internet. Yeah. And we assumed, we're programmed to think that people don't see what we put on the internet on some level. We've had to get used to the idea
internet
of
identity
becoming public figures.
Was a private identity, and that gradually became more, gradually had to get used to it becoming more public.
Yeah, and I've talked about this, where my journey as an anonymous person under, it wasn't very anonymous because it's my first name and middle name, but it's still, at some point, it became, that my boss knew I was pregnant because I was writing about it in my HTML blog in 19... And he went, congratulations. And I went, what do you mean? He goes, I read your website. And I was surprised. Yes. This is a time that people now probably, I think our kids, well, my kids are definitely growing up with not understanding. They understand that you're a public figure on the internet and that everything's public. But this has been a journey, a very weird journey for you and I, being part of that sort of original generation, because we were exploring ideas and anonymous. But then Facebook came along, and our real names were attached to a lot of our behaviour. We signed, again, unwittingly. This is death by 1,000 paper cuts to get here.
Well, it was really, I think it's one of the things that was a real, people now, I think, people don't realise how big a change that was when Facebook said, we want you to use your full legal name.
And your mum's going to be on there too.
But we didn't know our mums were going to be on there too. But I mean, I actually joined, Facebook early enough when it was it's strange, you couldn't join. You had to be.
You're on Spin Starts here and on this other community, and you moved to Facebook.
Exactly. All my LiveJournal friends were getting Facebook account, and you're like, okay. Yeah. And that thing when LiveJournal, the community norm was you had a pseudonym, and a username, and that it was not at all unusual for people to have multiple pseudonyms that you didn't cross very much. And when people did sort of cross the streams, they forgot to log out of one and onto the other.
All of those worlds are colliding.
That was often a great big... the fact that would be a cause of concern, that suddenly your worlds could collide. Yeah. would be a big thing.
All your Usenet friends, your alt.oz debate friends.
And the
goodness me.
Oh yeah, no, I mean Usenets. We're going back even further, but even that sort of.
No, I'm saying, but all of those people that you connected with in varying ways and wore multiple masks and multiple faces and multiple voices and said shit and talked shit and played with ideas.
Facebook was the first one that said
it's attached to you now,
attached to your real name, and we want all of those different sort of identities to be collapsed together. You're not to be. Not to have multiple accounts or anything like that. Now, of course, people still do, but it's much less common.
It's fun when your grandma and your mum debate with your favourite troll from 2002. That's always an interesting journey.
When you get those weird collisions, and there's sort of things where early on Zuckerberg would talk about how, hey, I think I think it's sort of dishonest to have multiple identities. And just thinking about, well, you're a billionaire who went to Harvard. You're probably okay with everybody you know knowing that you're a billionaire who went to Harvard.
And your name's Mark.
Yeah, but actually,
not Taya.
For most people, it's pretty awkward for you to have a lot of people to have your work and your family and your sort of other personal life collided like that, and it was really, really.
I've had to navigate that in a really painful way.
And of course, and now we understand that, almost everyone has learnt to navigate how to navigate Facebook in this sort of complicated way, where you go, well, okay, that
have they? Well, have you read the news comments?
Maybe they haven't.
I don't think they have.
Maybe a lot of people haven't. But a lot of people have learned about, is this a secret group or a closed group, so I'll join that. But that's a public group. I've got to think about whether I'm even going to join that. But
that's an automatic thing for a lot of people that wasn't before.
No,
and that's what's actually significant.
Facebook was a really big changer.
Especially for those that were used to hiding behind anonymity.
And it's pretty interesting. I mean, Google had enough people inside Google who were very much in that old, pre-Facebook mentality. I think they got a huge kickback against the using real names, and eventually they did sort of give in. But
don't you find it interesting that Zuckerberg in front of Congress and the memes that travelled where he looked a bit perplexed? And I think that's actually a natural face for this situation, because like you were saying about, was it Orchid?
Yes.
Where these things started with nerds in basements,
and
it got away from them. I think if Mark Zuckerberg wasn't making a completely bewildered "what the fuck has happened to my life" face, he wouldn't. Actually, it shows his humanity. Because I actually do believe that on some level he buys his own bullshit, in the sense that he is a relic of the ideal internet. The internet as the ideal that we remember, where it was you could be free to speak and you could be. I think it was a very idealized, like with America, the Constitution. It's an idealized view of free speech, but in reality, it gets away. And there's problems, and I think
and it is that
it's a good thing to be that idealistic on some level.
It is that very. I think there is some idealism there. Where I think he did, legitimately bought some of his own.
The internet is free.
Ideas about it's all free and just everyone shares everything. It's sharing your truth and your authentic self. But of course, it's totally. This idea that he, of course it's great for him to do that, but but even then, of course, he's actually quite closed about his own Facebook identity now, and the idea that that share our truth thing is a very
you mean share your data?
Yeah, well, of course,
that's where it got wrong.
Yeah, Facebook totally
went wrong.
Is. It's strip mining our privacy. It's pretty much their kind of business model. And it's now got to the point where, and
it wasn't really the deal. Like, if we actually think back and say, yes, okay, let's not talk about the terms of service, but it wasn't the deal that I signed up for. When I first signed up for Facebook, I remember, if I put myself, it's what my expectations were, was that this was a cool thing, I could connect with people, and I didn't think it was going to get like this. And I think in retrospect, if I could have, I would really be thinking, if I had the benefit of hindsight, I'd be really thinking about it.
And I think it's one of those things where it kept us. We got surprised by. We knew from things like MySpace and LiveJournal and so on that yes, of course, there was a deal here, but we thought the deal was that they were going to, sell our content.
Yeah.
And we liked providing content.
Facebook changed the deal.
And Facebook changed the deal. It became about they knew most people weren't going to provide.
I was on there to draw on the graffiti wall.
Yeah.
How many cock and balls I drew over the years on that graffiti wall, right?
Yeah.
It was fun. It was join funny groups and create funny groups, and I joined all of these Taya Smith likes, not being on fire, and all of a sudden, they've got a whole bunch of data about what I like.
Yes, the real thing is that they changed the deal because it wasn't about them selling the content you provided. It became about them getting more and more data out of you and selling the data, and it is because of its partly because of its sort of scale as well. I mean, Facebook. Yeah. One of the things I think Facebook made it when it was initially there, I think it got when it initially appeared, it got criticised for being, very controlled. You couldn't decorate your wall the way you could on MySpace. You didn't make 20 custom icons and all of those things. You'd get much constrained. And that was a big criticism on when it first appeared for people who were used to MySpace or LiveJournal or whatever. But what actually happened was it meant that people who didn't have a lot they really personally wanted to share, people who just could feel like a full participant, or you just there to connect with your friends and just do some, simple updates on your life, and you felt like you were fully participating, and that sort of lowered barrier to entry. And
this was before the like button even was a thing.
Yeah, and that was back when every Facebook update began with is. David is.
And Taya Smith likes not being on fire.
Yeah. And all
not being pregnant. I still get their posts.
And all of those.
It's stupid.
and it gradually just became this thing that the barrier to entry to be like a participant, in the sense of it's going to be something creatively, has sort of gone down and down. But the way it relentlessly tries to get more information out of you of some kind or another has really ramped up.
And I wonder if that trade-off is sort of the balance is tipped
away
from that.
I think pretty much everyone thinks it has.
Because I see
Facebook.
it purely as a channel, not as a community anymore. I very rarely, I only reactively respond. I don't comment as much as I used to. Yeah. I use it to post. I don't generally browse. I don't scroll Facebook much anymore because it's mostly noise and ads.
Yeah, and it's certainly it's a channel. I think everyone now understands that that Facebook. Facebook obviously as a company has decided that their biggest problem is privacy, and they're real, and they absolutely know that privacy is bad for them and they don't like it, but that's the focus on them. So sometimes they need to talk it up.
Well, I actually saw an article today,
as little as they can,
where they're saying that Facebook actually opposed the privacy legislation in Australia, and the US ambassador. I'm just actually hang on, I'm bringing it up here.
So some of the stuff I'm doing with
they objected to the expansion of our privacy laws, and they lobbied the US.
And some of the stuff I'm doing in ICANN and there's discussions about how the domain name system responds to the GDPR. And in those discussions, Facebook has been very aggressive. They've got their people in there, and they are pushing very, very strongly to keep, as little privacy controls to minimise the effect of privacy law.
Yeah. And
that happens on a whole bunch of different contexts. Facebook quite consciously is like, okay, privacy law is the enemy, and we are going to push against it. While at the same time talking up privacy, because they know it's a PR problem for them as well. So
trust me with your secrets, so I can use them against
you. Yeah, well, not even. But
it's not that evil, but
no, it's not even.
I'm sure it comes. But I think we need to clarify about this, which is these are hard problems, and that I think we assume and complex ones, and there's no bad faith really assumed here with the individuals involved. I think this is a machine that's gotten away from everybody.
Yeah, and it's not really about, because it's not
accident.
really about your, I mean, Facebook doesn't care about your individual secrets. It knows you'll put them on there. It knows that having that sort of sense of community and trust and engagement is sort of good for them. But it's not useful to them. They like everything to be. Well,
and that was actually an article that came out this week, which is another thing, which is that they've been using lookalike audiences, selling to banks and cross-referencing lookalike, using, I think, I've got to look it up. I'll put some notes, but there'll be a supporting post. But the big banks in America, as advertisers, have been able to access data for bad credit, and they're cross-referencing with Expedia, but they've actually been they're interested in that data, and it's actually cross-referenced to an individual as part of their check. So what they've been doing is accessing through their lookalike audiences, somehow through the API, getting individual data on their buying behaviour and using it as part of their credit assessments.
Yeah.
So it's not actually about it's not so much about whether Facebook are interested in the data. It's about how Facebook data can be used by partners.
But it's also
who do have an interest in
it's
you.
also them. I mean, at Facebook, everybody in doing that sort of stuff professionally would absolutely understand about
that's just the
anonymisation and de-anonymisation.
Yeah, exactly.
How you can provide data at scale and so on.
I don't think your average person understands what that means, though.
No.
Which is that when they talk about people having everyone's data, usually that doesn't attach to you as a person. No. It's usually on a dashboard with graphs, and it's on a macro aggregate level.
Yeah, usually
right?
it's
about trends and behavioural trends. I mean, interests.
I think Google actually throw away a lot of the individual data after a while and only keep the sort of aggregated, whereas Facebook is sort of nature is that they they very much try and do a lot of individual customization. It means they have that data, and they would be consciously aware that they must be selling some information.
Yeah, but it is actually directly identifiable information used in credit checks. I'll have to.
So this is the thing that people.
It's not so much Facebook's fault. It's those bad actors that utilise Facebook in the wrong and unintended way.
And it is one of those things where it just, I mean, anonymisation, we think about it as it's sort of naively, you sort of think, well, it hasn't have a name attached to it. It's only got a username or a number or something. Well, that's anonymous. But of course, it turns out that if they go, well, the person, the one person that's living in this suburb from, who went to this high school, who went to travel, had a job here.
You can drill down pretty well.
And you can drill down pretty quickly to the point where, it takes not that much information to link that back to an individual person with, 90% reliability or something like that.
Yeah.
So, and that's one of those processes. As I said, if you work in the industry, you're absolutely aware of how that works.
But in terms of your everyday person, and in the context of, they're probably hearing a lot about fake news and don't trust what you see and all of those sorts of things. And they do have a sneaking suspicion that those scary, creepy ads where you're having a conversation about Gatorade and a Gatorade ad pops up. Yeah. That's usually what's at play here. So they're using your behavioural data. It's not specifically, Taya likes Gatorade, therefore give her Gatorade. It's not listening to you.
Well, but
it's listening for keywords, and then
though sometimes it can be linked directly back to you because it's not listening for keywords, but it is linking things that you browse at the same time, and you'd forgotten that you browsed an ad when you were and things like that. So,
but also based on cross-referencing of those interests and predicting your behaviour. So that's where it starts to get into grey territory, because if you are a former AA person, and you have a number of previous interests, they can extrapolate that you might be interested in something else, and that's where it becomes a little muddy, because that's where it becomes predicting. I'm trying to explain this in plain English. I know there's all technical stuff here, But that's where it starts to get a bit creepy.
And it is quite hard to tell the difference between
manufactured consent.
Yes, am I getting this because it's some sort of
how convenient that they know.
Aggregated marketing data is getting better at giving you exactly the ads you want, and are they do they actually know exactly who you are?
And the answer is we're more predictable than we think.
Yeah, well, that's part of the answer. Sometimes it is that they do know exactly who you are and they're feeding it back to you, but it's very hard to tell the difference between, and hard to tell whether Facebook was just getting better at doing what it does or is actually stepping over some lines in terms of privacy. And we know that we know that they're stepping over lines in terms of privacy. A lot of that is, Facebook holds back for legal reasons, but if it could, it would. So they're intrinsically not.
Well, they're in a spot of trouble everywhere at the moment.
Yeah.
So everyone's trying to find them, and it's pile on Facebook, I think, at the moment.
Yes, I know they're very aware, and they're the biggest offender of the.
They're the lightning rod for all of this too.
Well, and and they have been.
They're not the only ones.
They're not the only one. I mean, Google certainly has. They're in the same business, which is that they're basically an advertising and marketing information company. And that in the sense that may not be what not exactly what they do, but it's where all their money comes from.
Yeah.
Even today, Google is still. I mean, Google clearly hates the fact that they're an advertising company. The founders have spent their last decade trying really hard to invent all sorts of other businesses, and are generally none of the others are doing that well. I mean, maybe they will succeed. Maybe in a decade we'll just think of Google as the self-driving car.
I remember when we used to do ads on the internet. That was fun, wasn't it?
Yeah. Maybe in a while, but at the moment, advertising is where all the money comes from. Advertising increasingly is this. It pushes people to push up against the edges of privacy and do as much sort of it's like a commercial surveillance, and no one really seems to have a good answer to it. And of course, as I think we also discussed, advertising on the internet is an immensely corrupt industry as well. So the Google and
they're
Facebook
not exactly advertising agencies in general aren't incentivized to do the right thing.
No,
just with their business model.
They're not in, and Facebook and Google are sort of in some ways the more. I mean, they're the huge, but they're by no means the worst. There's a lot of advertising forms of internet advertising that are much less honest and much more
we should deep dive into those, shouldn't we?
At some point we're really getting into the really the advertising sort of
this is the fun stuff.
Things like remember all the
I haven't gotten to the scary bit yet.
And I mean, we sort of like when it was all advertising industry, when it was all dominated by people, malware that would take over your browser and insert special ad bars and things and all of that stuff, which is just, I mean, it clearly it's at least close to illegal and often illegal.
Well, this is where I am in grey area, and why I actually, what the catalyst for me actually deciding that I have to change sides and quit marketing as a business and really check what I was doing. I've only got 5 minutes, but which was the Waze app and what Waze have done. And I was sitting on LinkedIn, and are you familiar with the Waze app? It's a navigation app. And I saw this post on LinkedIn lauding Waze's great innovation, which was contextual advertising within the navigation app. So if you drove past, let's say you're driving home from work, you drive past a billboard with a McDonald's ad on it. And this was actually the use case that they used, which was very troubling because it's actually just hiding in plain sight. You see a McDonald's billboard to your left, the Waze app pops up and says, "Do you want a burger?" And it will reroute you. And for me, that just seemed so unethical and raised so many questions around what we're doing as marketers.
Yeah.
And the reason, and my concerns, I actually went and I thought, okay, people are going to share my concerns. There's going to be there was 150 comments on this post. They were all CMOs of major corporations saying how great this was, how innovative this was, how wonderful it was. And as someone who's lost family to alcoholism and those sorts of things, I go, that's not okay. It's actually the point where I went, I'm out. I can't. I can't back this stuff anymore.
Yeah, it's clearly saying this service that you've signed up for is not for you anymore.
But it's actually damaging. But there's people with real problems with convenience food and junk food and health, and this is a public health issue as much as it is around how the hell can you promote a banana in that sense, a better choice when it's an engineered and manufactured and manipulated decision. I mean, already my Domino's app on Tuesdays tells me pizza. How long is it till it knows when I feel like pizza? based on where I am, and that's
I actually
scary.
had a friend who once was rung up at work and by the pizza place who just said that we noticed you hadn't ordered. We just wanted to check you were okay. So I mean we are more predictable than we often get surprised, and we're manipulable. And the ethics of that are
but with addictive foods and things with addiction and sugar and all of those things, people working longer hours
where it's hard to even see what were the positive applications of that.
Exactly.
It's not going to pop up and go,
vote today.
We noticed you're passing a store that sells fruit.
Exactly. It's not used for that. And that's the thing, is where we could be repurposing those sorts of solutions, and that's where the flip side of that, which is these are good things and great ideas, but at the same time there needs to be some ethical and policy, and there needs to be a collective agreed upon line in the sand around what we will and won't do, because we now have all of this data, the ability to manipulate this kind of stuff. And what if you were, and this is a class issue as well, which is if people in America, working class, working 12 hours a day, you're a single mum, and they know that about you. They know you're a single mum. They know that the areas you drive. They know when you stop at the shop. They know all of these things that the phone tracks, and you're vulnerable. And they go, oh well, how about pizza, or how about this? I go, well, that's okay if it's and that's not a choice. That's manipulation.
And this is the intended use for it, right? This isn't even something
that's
where
actually their KPI.
It's not.
Someone's job depends on it.
This isn't one of those things where the technology can be subverted in a way that surprises you.
No.
This is.
It's actually someone's job to ensure that occurs.
Because that issue about de-anonymization, that's one of the things where that often gets subverted and a technology gets used in a way that you weren't expecting to track people down and things like that. But in fact, I think I'm trying to remember. It may have been the Belle de Jour. There was a great hack where someone was able to work out that reporters had discovered the identity by just buying Google AdWords on the combination of searches, so they could tell when someone was near to working something out. And things like that where you go, oh well, there's a de-anonymization hacks or other interesting things where you can dive in, and a few people will do it. It's more that this is something where the mainstream. This is the actual purpose of it is. Very hard to see how it's going to not. You can see all the see all the bad outcomes straight away, and you can't see many of the good ones.
It's not a coincidence that the big banks are hiring a lot of data scientists.
Well, big banks
because they're figuring out ways to mash. I know this because I've been part of these the CRCs and things where they're trying to do these things, which is it's not just one data set, but it's actually comparative data sets. It's a number of data sets and cross-referencing.
Once you can correlate things, there's all sorts of things that really surprise people.
And robo-debt is just the beginning of this.
Yes,
that's a whole other podcast, and I've got to go.
Okay.
But I have to do school pickup. But it was great. That was a great conversation.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah.